The Aurora Energy Transition Summit is coming up on the 19th of November 2025 in London. Participate alongside senior leaders from utilities, finance, government and technology to address the UK's energy transition challenges and solutions. Explore net zero, grid reliability, hydrogen demand, industrial energy and strategic investments all in one high-level gathering. Head to the Aurora website, auroraer.com/events to find out more, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged, the go-to podcast exploring the global energy transition. My name is Rodrigo Borges, and I'm Aurora's market lead for Brazil. One of the largest power markets in the globe is facing a pivotal moment. With record levels of renewable generation and increasing grid congestion, curtailment in Brazil is no longer a theoretical risk. It's a daily operational challenge. Add to that the imminent increase of hourly price volatility and demand for firm capacity, and you have a perfect storm of complexity and opportunity. Working with my international counterparts is an important part of my role, and during this conversation, it was surprising to realize how much we relied on hydroelectric power plants as a Swiss Army knife to solve all our problems. We are now seeing that this is not the case anymore, and this kind of leaves Brazil blindsided as we are facing similar challenges as pretty much every country with high renewables penetration, perhaps with fewer tools at our disposal. In this context, modeling becomes more important to drive decision-making, and traditional models don't quite do the trick, especially when complexity increases and there is a need to account for things like batteries and flexible demand. In today's episode, we are diving into Brazil renewables market, exploring three main topics: market volatility, curtailment, and the strategic role of storage. We will unpack what that means to developers, investors, and policymakers. Joining me today are two leaders shaping the future of energy in Brazil. Marcio Trannin brings deeper regional insights as Managing Director South America at Sunco and Vice-President of ABSOLAR, the Association of Solar Generation. Welcome to the podcast, Marcio.
Thank you, Rodrigo, in name of Aurora. It's a pleasure to be here to share some thoughts about the moment we are living here and about the energy sector in Brazil for the future. It's a very crucial moment, as you mentioned in your initial talk.
Ricardo Motoyama has over 20 years of experience in energy, including leadership roles at CPFL and Electro. He's now Senior Vice President in Commercial Strategy and Business Development at Elera, one of Brazil's most active players in renewables. Welcome to the podcast, Ricardo.
It's a pleasure to be here at Energy Unplugged to discuss such an important subject today for Brazil, but not only for Brazil, but for the whole world.
Let's begin with market volatility. Historically, volatility in Brazil was primarily tied to the unpredicted of water inflows, with energy prices fluctuating on a weekly basis, mostly associated with the uncertainties driven by prolonged dry seasons or unexpected above the average water inflows. However, the landscape has shifted since 2021. We now have hourly pricing, and the capacity renewable has tripled over the last 4 years. This has led to price cannibalization and surplus of power, introducing additional risk to the traditional power purchase agreements. Aurora's latest modeling shows that the renewables PPAs in Brazil may carry an additional cost of R$110 per megawatt hour, which is around $20, due to the risk factors such as intraday spreads and curtailment. These risks are increasingly priced into contracts and can increasingly affect the profitability and bankability of some projects. In more extreme case, they can push debt service cover ratio from 1.4 to as low as 0.4, depending on how these risks are priced. Marcio, I would like to start with you. How this volatility is impacting project development and financing in Brazil?
It's impacting a lot. It's impacting a lot, actually. Development is the beginning of the activities in terms of solar PV projects in the value chain. Right? So if we have a problem in the investment itself, we have a problem in the beginning of this value chain. So we have a real problem in the development. Imagine that we have a lot of outorgas, a lot of grants that were issued in the past, and there's no connection for them. We have projects here in Brazil that were signed to the 1212, and they are trying to give back this without a guarantee execution. So we have a real problem today in Brazil in terms of the confidence for new investments. This is a reality. So it impacts a lot the development, and it impacts also the financing. And the financing is more crucial, under my understanding, because we have several projects in Brazil. I think Elera has some projects like this that are facing some problems to pay the debts with the banks. So there are several discussions in ABSOLAR and also by the companies by themselves about standstill and so on. So we are facing a very challenging moment. The numbers you mentioned here, Rodrigo, 110 reais per megawatt hour, I will not discuss the number itself, if it's this number or it's another number. It will depend a lot on the considerations that we make, but for sure is a big number. And we have some concepts behind, because there is no other way out from this situation than to try to address this whole situation in a whole. There is no silver bullet, as we know. So let's solve this problem and all the other problems will be solved. But I believe that we have good conditions to solve it, especially because solar technology, allied with BESS, allied with other technologies, whatever, but solar PV projects will lead, independent on what will happen, will lead the expansion in Brazil due to several reasons. They are modular, they are fast to development and to install, they are easy to make some hybrid projects with wind, with hydro in the reservoirs, with BESS, with other technologies. It's a very democratic technology in terms of location. You have the same radiation factor here and in 10 kilometers. This is not the same for wind. This is absolutely not the same for thermal due to the gas pipes or hydro with the rivers. So what you're facing here is we need to believe that Brazilian market will grow, and it will grow. We need to believe that the protagonism of this expansion will be driven by solar, for sure, due to the characters I mentioned, but we need to improve some aspects. So there is no silver bullet, but there are other apps. For example, we need better economic signals for prices. We need some transparency in what is happening. We need to solve the curtailment issue. If it will be a technical solution or if it will be a financial solution, a commercial solution, whatever it is, we need to address this to bring back the confidence of the investors. We need to have more predictability regarding the future. So there are several aspects that we need to discuss further in this podcast that we need to address in order to move on. But I truly believe in the market, despite we are facing a very, very turbulent moment in the present.
I 100% agree with you, Marcio, on the fact that we need better economic signals and we need to start discussing mitigation strategies as soon as possible, right? A lot has been discussed around how to allocate the cost, and I think there is an opportunity for us to start discussing ways and strategies to reduce the costs rather than those how to allocate them on the grid. And maybe here across the Andes, Chile might be a good example, right? Because they faced a very similar situation over the years. The regulation for BESS was being established in 2019, and we are now expecting the market to reach almost 9 gigawatts of BESS by the end of the decade, which is kind of amazing compared to the size of the market that the Chilean sector has. And this preparation is what, in this discussion around strategy to mitigate these risks, is what is very, very important. Ricardo, considering the same context of these market risks, but focus a bit on curtailment, it has become a significant concern for generators, banks, and investors. In August this year, Brazil experienced record levels in curtailment with both solar and wind, representing around 37 and 22% of their full generation potential, respectively. Our analysis identifies three main factors contributing to this scenario: the accelerated growth of renewables, infrastructure lagging behind this installed capacity, and the presence of inflexibility into the system. My question to you is, what are the operational and commercial implications for generators, and what are the most promising strategies to mitigate this impact?
Thank you, Rodrigo. As Marcio mentioned, the impacts for generators are especially the renewable ones and the most especially the ones with solar products, given the high penetration of solar in Brazil, are huge. So, like you said, the numbers talk for themselves. So 37%, 22% of loss of revenues for any kind of developer or entrepreneur or any company, it's a big impact. So this should be addressed and it should be resolved in order to gain back the traction that is deserved for such an important source of energy for Brazil and for the world, and such an important aspect for the transition. But like you said yourself, it's also an opportunity. Whenever we see this, and this is an operational impact that becomes a commercial impact, not only for the generator, but also for some clients, especially the ones that have self-production benefits and so on. We do also face and see some opportunities to introduce BES and so on. You gave the example of Chile. This is very important. The size of the Chilean market is very small compared to the Brazilian market, especially when you compare the solar capacity in Brazil compared to Chile. And today we basically have nothing of BES in operation in Brazil. So EPE, the energy planning entity of Brazil, expects or projects the need for 35 gigas of capacity to address this increasing renewable matrix in Brazil. And we believe that BES, alongside other storage alternatives, will become very important to address this issue. So we do understand Brazil, like Chile, has the opportunity to focus on the implementation of BES. So the first step is really to guarantee the evolution of the regulatory framework. So to gain traction on that and really give a solution to the current framework, to unlock investments on that front, it will be very important. And we at Elera, and also being part of Brookfield Group, understand that we are very well positioned to influence on that and also become an important investor on that front in Brazil.
Absolutely, Ricardo. Flexibility and storage might be two very important words for the Brazilian sector. I always look at the Chilean numbers with kind of excitement because it demonstrates that Brazil can do so much more in terms of investing in BES. And I believe we are starting to see some signs that this will happen. A lot of excitement around the capacity auction, which leads to my next topic on the agenda. As you mentioned, there is a significant need in terms of firm capacity to manage the intermittency of renewables. We are significantly expanding the sector over the next few years based on solar and wind. There is no other better alternative for us to keep growing, but this brings the uncertainty of these sources as an aspect for us to consider as well. Our numbers in terms of additional firm capacity for the next 20 years is that we're going to need to add 47 gigawatts that will be achievable through a diversified approach, including batteries, hydro, pumped storage, and thermal. Storage technology in particular will be critical for providing enough flexibility and also help mitigating curtailment, right? International experience is very valuable to this discussion. And this is the reason why I brought the example of Chile, but this same approach applies to the experience that we are seeing in the whole Europe, in the US. Italy, for example, is one of the most attractive markets for BES deployment because it has some similar characteristic. My question to both of you is, with this capacity auction on the pipeline for the next year, how do you both see storage evolving in the energy matrix?
Basically, we as Sunco, we are acting not only in Brazil, we act also in Spain, Italy, and Germany. And we know that in Italy and Germany, we are basically developing BES projects due to the capacity of the system to absorb, giving good spread or hourly spread. So we are basically developing batteries there. So we are very involved in all this operation in Europe. And what we need in Brazil, we need the auction itself. The portaria of the Ministry of Mines and Energy was from October last year. And we have nothing. I heard that probably in the beginning of October, so 1 year after the first public consultation, we will have the second phase of this public consultation. the CP39. We need this, and we need some rules to understand how batteries will work in Brazil. And we are 2 years to obtain the rules about this. 1 month ago, 3 weeks ago, the ANEEL tried to approve the rules, and it was not able to approve the rules. And I understand it because they will approve something absolutely wrong in terms of wheeling charges, in terms of transmission costs. Okay, so that's why they didn't approve. But 2 years to approve a rule for batteries. We have international experience, we have international benchmark. Why we take so long to approve rules in Brazil? I can't understand. This is something that I can't understand, being honest. We have a big problem here to operate the system since August 2023, right? When we have the blackout. We had the recent Father's Day that the operation of the system was in the limit to another blackout, and we are not able, as a Brazilian, I'm saying this as a Brazilian, we were not able until today to approve rules for batteries and to approve an auction. I don't know what's happening. I wish I know. Unfortunately, we don't know. So first of all, what I think is we need this auction. Why we need this auction? Because I'm in the sector since 1998, and I passed for a lot of transformations in the energy sector. But we know that when there is an auction that's launched, it was the same for wind technology, then solar technology, and the next one is batteries. When it happens, I'm sure that will open a door, that will enter a lot of new investors and new technologies to guarantee a good operation for the system. But first of all, we need this, let's say, political, inspiration to finally publish what is necessary to move on this path. So this is what's missing. Once it is established, I'm sure that the batteries will enter, and will enter with the relevance that they deserve in the operation of the system.
We understand that the regulatory framework needs some improvements, especially on the charging and transmission charts. And the regulatory framework, it needs to be read. We have many players already have pipeline of projects. Elera is one of those players, and many others in the market that is just waiting for this to be read, and the auction that has been around for some time to happen. So for many investments to come around. Everybody you talk to in the sector says that the flexibility is important. The operator, the regulator, the planning agents, many other agents, everybody understand and sign behind this, that flexibility is very important. One of the answers for the flexibility is the storage. So the best will be this, that will come in a faster way, but many other alternatives such as pump hydro will also be needed for the market. And the sooner we have the regulatory framework read and the economic signs come from the auctions and have the initial investments, the rest will come together. So we need to have this read to come and start building the flexibility that's so much required by the system.
Great insights, gentlemen. Definitely a regulatory framework is important for BESS, especially considering the capacity auction is the first opportunity for BESS to be introduced into the system. And learning from the other experiences we have in South America, like the Chilean one that we were mentioning, and the regulatory framework for BESS established over the last 6 years. So that's where now they are ready to build so many BESS capacity, because something was restructured for quite a while now. And this is something that we were discussing on the podcast, right? So we need to look at these alternatives, these risks in a broader way, and take everything into consideration, provide better economic signals, better regulatory frameworks to allow the investors to come and to play the role in each one of these markets. And we also need to take the implications of each one of these different markets into consideration. Like the capacity market is being designed to add flexibility, but has huge implications on how we can try to mitigate curtailment, reduce the intraday spreads, so on and so forth. So maybe there is an opportunity for these auctions, especially considering the flexibility of pumped hydro or BESS or other alternatives that could help mitigate curtailment, to add it to the system with more intention, because this might be a good word for us to summarize the opportunity for BESS. There is also other things that we can improve and we can add to the table in considering the broader system in Brazil. Let's digest un pouco and let's discuss a bit about the policy and the strategy. Considering that right now, the vast scale of Brazil and the vast pace of the energy transition, the complexity of these moving parts is increasing a lot, and modeling these become very tricky. And the current models are unable to fulfill all the analytics, including BESS, flexible demand, and this needs to be somehow updated to take into consideration their new reality. I was remember last week with some clients that the current models, they considering that the inflexibility of renewables is discounted by the demand, and then you have the dispatchable sources as part of the way to meet the demand. And right now we are doing the opposite, right? We are overrating the other dispatchable sources, and the intermittence of the renewables is being the final piece and is being curtailed. So an open question to both of you: what policy changes you advocate to accelerate investments and to increase grid resiliency? And what business perspectives on how Sunco and Elera are adapting their portfolios and strategy to navigate in this both risky but also opportunistic market?
I will just summarize, I think, two aspects from the topics we've been discussing here. I think the first one, we need to address the curtailment. So it's a reality, but the way that's being done is impacting just some specific players. So that should be addressed from a regulatory and commercial perspective in order to allow for investors to really see the way they can manage this and come back to invest in such an important sector. So I think this is the most important aspect for the moment. But also we need to address not this what is urgent for the moment, but giving the perspective of the sector, which is becoming increasingly more urgent, which is the flexibility. So we just discussed it to have the regulatory framework for storage, addressing also the auction, and have the corrective regulatory framework for storage. We will also unlock many investments in the flexibility front that will, together with the solution for curtailment, allow for the energy transition that's so much required for Brazil. Brazil is a red sector, an electric sector with a very renewable percentage, so when compared to the world. But to keep in such a way, we need really to address those two topics very urgently so we can unlock investments and have a better perspective for the future and continue to have such a renewable matrix in Brazil.
Under my perspective, I think it's more urgent in Brazilian cities. There are a lot of them, okay? But if I need to make a cherry picking, I think that the right economical signal is the most important one, because this is, under my perspective, the origin of a lot of our problems today. We still have a system where the prices and the tariffs, they don't give the right signal for new investments, for right consumption. And everything that we tried, for example, the demand response initiative, is something that's staying in the past. So we started this, I think, 8 years ago, more or less, in the northeast of Brazil for specific clients. I was working at that time with some demand response, but it's still an initiative. This is something that we need to correct as soon as possible, because the right economical signal will be very, very important, okay? Clearly, the curtailment risk that Ricardo mentioned is something that is probably the most important and urgent item in this agenda, especially because we have some players that are being highly impacted, and it is impacting the capacity and the confidence in Brazil to keep investing in Brazil. So without private investment, we will not grow in the rhythm that we expect Brazil to grow. So this is very important to address these 2 points, among others. But I think that the main message that I want is very important. at least in my perspective, is that we are expecting the new regulatory framework comes from people who don't understand the sector. I think that what is important is us, the ones that know about the electric sector, the associations, to work in a new regulatory framework. It's very hard to get a consensus, or let's say a minimum consensus among the interests of all the players in the market. So we have the thermal ones that are fighting for some benefits. We have the solar ones, we have the wind ones, we have the distribution, the traders, the consumers one. So there are a lot of interests, but there is one interest that is not being, let's say, taken care with the necessary attention, the energy sector itself. We need to start this new regulatory framework coming from this side of the table that understand the sector. If something comes via provisional measure or something like this, probably we'll face a lot of problems. In the past of Brazil, in all the reforms of the sector, the government always talked with the players. This is where the solutions will be built. If we don't go in this way, I'm really afraid about what can come, what can arise from these provisional measures. When you left this to be decided by, I don't know, the Congress, you never know what can arise from there. So it's very important to have a minimum consensus from our side and a strong discussion with the government to understand what is feasible, what's not, and how to implement this, in which phases, and the main concerns. I think this is the main important point. So we need to address, there are points, the technical points that we need to address, but the way we are addressing is not correct. This is the fact. We are not addressing in the proper way the main problems of the system, because we are waiting government, Congress, to approve rules from some that they don't know. They are not living, they are not paying the bill of the curtailments, they are not living in a market without economical signals. So I'm very concerned about this. We need to change this way, this mindset, to try to improve the new regulatory framework. This is what I think.
These are two very well structured insights, and picking some of them and elaborating a bit. Yeah, a broader solution that considers all the implications in the market is critical. We see a lot of the market right now like pushing the regulation to their own interest. This is not the best for the system as a whole, right? So we need to take every point of view in consideration. And as you both mentioned, there is no silver bullet, right? There is no one solution. It's medium, short, and long-term solutions that will be in place all together to help us evolve and reach where we want it to be. And one of these solutions, which I feel is very important, that's why I mentioned the modeling and the understanding of the data, is the economic signal, right? For Brazil to be so big of a country, so complex, I think there is an opportunity for us to improve the economic signal. We have deep expertise in modeling nodal markets like Texas, like California, like Chile, Japan, Australia, so on and so forth. We are on a plan to bring this kind of expertise to Brazil and provide more detailed and accurate data on curtailment on a nodal level, on an asset level. But it could evolve to nodal pricing, which could be a very good way for us to start giving this economic signal, among others, right? There is economic signal that can go on the tariff, so on and so forth. And this is very important so we can take economic decisions throughout the sector, not only based on the incentives or on the regulation. And this will be very critical, especially considering that Brazil is hosting COP30 later this year. This is a milestone moment for that take places in the Amazon region and puts Brazil on the spotlight of the global climate negotiation. With the world watching, Brazil has a unique opportunity to lead this clean energy transition with modernization and investment of flexibility solutions. First, I would like to start with you, Marcio. If you have a blank slate, how would you redesign Brazil dispatch model to better accommodate renewables?
Brazil is a big, complex, interconnected system, probably the biggest one in the world. I don't know if I'm right or not, but if it's not the big, for sure it's the top three in terms of distance. So I think that the work that ONS, the TSO here in Brazil, made from all the years It's an amazing job in the end of the day. It's not easy to operate a system like this with the complexity, with the distances. Since the initiation of the renewables in Brazil, it's not a hydrothermal system anymore. So the operation must adapt itself to a more decentralized, especially after the solar, a more decentralized operation. So it's impossible to operate a system like Brazil in the same way we thought 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because it's a completely different system. Very decentralized, with the consumers taking their own decisions regarding generation through distributed generation, and I hope taking their own decisions regarding the consumption itself after the right economical signal in the tariff that they will pay, because today we don't have it. Okay, so I can charge my car anytime because I will pay the same price. So this is not optimal solution. So we need to understand that the advent of the DSO is something that is very important for a system like Brazil. I know that it's not an easy task. Distribution companies are focused on something. We know we don't have a binomial tariff. We have a monomial tariff. So what is crazy? So we will need to adapt several things: intelligent metering, smart metering. We need to do a lot of job, but basically the solution for the operation of this is based on the decentralization. How to do it is to discuss and discuss and discuss, and to get international experience, for example, and benchmark, to bring to Brazil and say, okay, guys, it's time to the DSO. It's time to operate the system in a different way, because we don't have more the big hydros and the big thermals in these specific points. The reservoirs, they have limited capacity of regularization. So we need the renewables, and the renewables, they are not centralized. It's not easy to predict what will be the generation. So how to adapt to this is decentralizing the operation. This is the only way. There is no other way.
The system we have today is not the system we had. I would not even go much further in the past, not even 10 years, even 5 years ago. We didn't have as we were recalling the other day, we used to have the peak hour at 2:00. So because of the use of air conditioner, that would be maybe was 2019, 2020, something like that. So now we are in the completely opposite situation because of the way the system has been so much decentralized, because also the planning is not centralized anymore. So the planning can be centralized, but the decisions are decentralized. So the very same situation is happening, like Marcio very well pointed out here. 1 million people are doing the decisions of how to use their energy, how to produce their energy. So the very same situation needs to be addressed from an operational perspective. For a complex situation, you need to have also complex answers. So that's how we should address this. But I really like the way you, Rodrigo, and also Marcio put that we need to have the mindset well located. The reason why we are in such a much more complex situation, or the balance, the situation that we are now, is because we didn't have the correct economic signal. So if we do have the correct economic signal and the right tools for the operator, in addition to the correct economic signal, that will make the life of the DSO less hard than it is today. Today, the life of the DSO must be very hard. The way they start the day is very different the way it's in the middle of the day, and very different the way it's in the end of the day. So the more tools we can provide to them, but having as a mindset or as a philosophy the correct signal will make it easier for them to operate the system. The correct word is less difficult. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. The role of the grid operator is becoming extremely difficult and complex, and it needs to manage all the uncertainty and avoiding the system to collapse on a daily dispatch, on a real life kind of approach. And this is something that is becoming increasingly more complex based on all the growth we see in renewables and uncentralized generation. And you both mentioned a topic that is very important for this whole discussion around, which is the role of the off-taker, of the demand, right? The demand has played a very shy approach and very small role in how to can add flexibility to the system. And on that topic that we discussed around providing mitigation strategy and economic signal, we did some calculations on a previous discussion with our clients earlier this year that, for example, if we had a lot of demand on the same profile as a solar generation, we could reduce curtailment by half, for example, depending on the level of this demand. And this is a good example. You mentioned, Marcio, the electric vehicles, right? We are charging at 6 p.m. while we could be doing something more smart and charging them when the prices are lower. But again, we don't have any incentive to do this on our house because we have no economic signal. So it's all across the sector. This is something that we could improve. Ricardo, starting with you now, to wrap up, one sentence around what does success look like for Brazil energy transition in 2030?
That's a hard one, but I would say that today flexibility. I think that we need to keep adding renewable sources, but with the renewable sources, with the intermittence, we also need the safety of having the flexibility provided by storage. So and many other alternatives, together with the economic signal that will also defer investments or change the consumption profile of the consumer. So I would say, to summarize this, the flexibility would become future for that to keep on this very successful route that Brazil has been doing in terms of transition and have such a renewable matrix for electricity.
Marcio, same question to you. What is success for you in Brazil energy transition by the end of the decade?
Same question, same answer. I think Ricardo was. I think this is our challenge. You know that Brazil, among the big economies in the world, all of them have a target in terms of energy transition, 2035, 2040, 50, 60, whatever it is. All of them, including China, have a target in the energy transition. We don't have a target, a clear target. Why we don't have? Because we know we are renewable. We are renewable, right? We are not renewable. We don't know how to do the energy transition. We are facing this in the bills of the curtailment we are paying. We don't know how to do it. So the answer is not to have a green energy matrix, is to know how to operate it. So bring this flexibility, I think will bring a real energy transition for Brazil. We are losing our leadership in comparison to other countries in terms of a green energy matrix, and we are losing, and we will keep losing if we don't change our mindset to get more flexibility and to be agile enough to implement it. Because I think that we have the diagnosis, but unfortunately, we are not fast enough to implement the measures.
Yes, we are suffering from our own success, right? We are so heavy dependent on renewables that we are struggling to have a good plan and a good integration on how this will all balance itself for the upcoming years. Gentlemen, I'm sure there is a lot of people listening who would love to understand a bit about your personality. So before we go, any personal anecdotes from your journey in the energy sector that shaped your thinking on today's topics that you'd like to share?
If I may, Marcio, maybe this is very, very similar to many of the electric players or people that work. It's a sector that everybody falls in love. So that's a thing. I'm not an engineer, so I fall into the sector in such an unpredictable way, but I'm here for more than 20 years. And I would say that the best part of this sector is a long-term journey. So the problems that we are facing today are decisions that were taken 5 years, 10 years ago. This time frame is become shorter, but it's still a true sentence to say this is a long-term sector. So whenever action we do today, we will have impact in our future 5 years, 10 years from now. So I think that whenever we have this in mind, whenever something doesn't seem so urgent, the way that the sector is organized, that today's action is very important for our future, and our decisions today will impact the futures of our market to 5-10 years from now.
From my perspective, Rodrigo, it's a very interesting question you made. It's not an anecdote from myself, but I don't know if it's really an anecdote or not. As Brazilians, you know that when we lost to Germany from 7-1, in the World Championship here in Brazil. In the third or fourth goal, we started to make jokes with all the situation. So I think that Brazilian is very common to make jokes about the strange situations that we put ourselves in the electric sector. This is exactly what's happening. So I think there is a sentence, a very impacting sentence, but it's very real sentence sent by Roberto Campos, one of the biggest entrepreneurs, that Brazil never lose an opportunity to lose an opportunity. So this is something that I think that we need to avoid, especially in the energy sector. Why especially in the energy sector? Because it's probably the electric sector, not the energy itself, but the electric sector. We have all the tools in our hands to be the leaders, to be the example for the rest of the world, how to manage the energy transition. And we are losing this opportunity again. So we have a sector that is basically 90-something% renewable, and we are suffering for this amount of renewables in Brazil. We need to change this. We cannot lose this opportunity to show the world how things can go in this energy transition, and we are losing again. So Roberto Campos, unfortunately, is being right again. I hope that for my kids, I have 3, so at the end of the day, I hope that my kids, they will live not in the country of the future, as my father said, that I will live in the country of the future. So I'm living today in the country of the future, not the present. I hope my kids will be able to live in a country of the present. So this is not an anecdote itself, but it's a very impacting sentence that I think is very important and reflects a lot the moment we are passing through.
Thank you, Marcio and Ricardo. I think you could have left the 7-1 out of the podcast, but that's fine. I hope we can be successful in next year's World Cup, so we can take this out of the equation. Ricardo, Marcio, thank you very much for your insights and contributions and helping us unpack the challenges and opportunities ahead of Brazil energy transition during this podcast. It was very much appreciated. Thank you again, both of you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Marcio, for the pleasure conversation that we had today.
Thank you a lot, Rodrigo. Count on me for other opportunities. I'm here to help Brazil to move on in the energy sector. So it was a pleasure.
That was Rodrigo Borges, Aurora's market lead for Brazil, talking to Ricardo Motoyama, Senior Vice President of Commercial Strategy and Business Development at Elera, and Marcio Trannin, Managing Director of South America at Sunco and Vice President of ABSOLAR. Thanks for listening to Energy Unplugged. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to follow the podcast via whatever platform you use.